Good morning, everyone. I am Dana Lawrence, the Energy Systems Engineer Intern for the demand side at the Caribbean Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency, CCREEE. Welcome to the IRRP series of capacity building sessions brought to you by the CCREEE in partnership with the Technical Assistance Program for Sustainable Energy in the Caribbean, TAPSEC, funded by the German Corporation for International Cooperation, GIZ, and the German government in partnership with the European Union. Planning for the future of the electricity sector requires an appreciation of the technical issues arising from grid expansion with renewable energy integration, as well as responding to demand-side changes. These sessions are designed to address critical elements of the integrated resource and resilience planning process. Our aim is to build institutional capacity for energy planning across the region by collaborating with stakeholders towards delivering IRRPs for several Caribbean countries. In today's capacity building session, we will explore demand-side management. Before we begin, a few reminders. Please use the raise hand feature if you have a question and wait to be acknowledged. You may also enter your questions in the Q&A throughout the session, and we will pause periodically to address your questions. Today, our capacity building will be led by Professor Sharma and Dr. Bahadur Singh from the Faculty of Engineering at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine campus. We look forward to a productive and interactive session. I now hand over to Professor Sharma.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. And I trust that we are all in sound health and COVID-free as we are. This morning, we are continuing our presentation, and we are doing today a topic which is dear to my heart, which is demand-side management. And why it's there is because these are things that we can all do to contribute to a better climate, reduction in energy uses, and by extension, reduction in our carbon footprint. But more importantly, to person, individually, it will redound to a reduction in your electricity bill. So the way we are going to handle the session this morning is that I would be presenting what I would call the basic theory and philosophy behind demand-side management. I will discuss what are the different modes and modalities you can use to do demand-side management. I look at how much action you can take, irrespective of where your utility is at. But more importantly, you will look at personally the things you can do to reduce your particular load in a particular area. And once I've completed that, we will go on to looking at how different states in the Caribbean have handled the demand-side management up to this point. Demand-side management in terms of the utilities in the Caribbean is a work in progress. And once we are able to guide it to the area that we are looking at, we can accomplish a lot in terms of what we intend to do and what our intention in terms of reducing global footprint. Many of the things that we do require what I consider low-hanging fruits. And intuitively, we will look at many of the things that you can do. But what is important is to understand what are the objectives of the demand-side management and how we can accomplish it both as a utility and as an individual. Because the individual added together will create a major effect on what happens at the utility. And what happens at the utility integrated over the whole country gives you what you're looking for in terms of your demand-side management techniques. So we are going to look at the process of demand side management according to these 5 areas. We're going to go through a deep dive introduction into demand side management, the evolution of the technology, how it has been utilized in different spaces, what are the challenges, and maybe touch on how you can overcome some of the challenges with respect to your particular environment. And I want to put forward initially to you is that one of the issues that one must be cognizant of when we are looking at any of the subject matter that we have handled, both in the past and currently, is we must note that there is no one-to-one relationship between what has been done abroad and what needs to be done in your particular country or island. Many of the things that have been done abroad may not be applicable in terms of a wholesale translation into an island environment. One must know what are the limitations of the techniques. One must know what are the limitations of your particular environment. And when we put those together, we can now come up with a particular plan which works for your particular environment. And every environment is peculiar to that particular country. So immediately I'm telling you that we cannot translate things one-to-one. What we can translate would be the objectives. So what is important is to know what your objectives are, know where you are going to put those objectives, and know who you're applying the objectives for and what can and cannot work, and what are your limitations. And many times your limitations in our environment are limitations which are linked directly to the politics of the environment. So that will be part of our many of the challenges that we look at. Then we will look at demand side management from a global perspective, and then related to the regional perspective. And we'll draw conclusions from that. And from that conclusions, we should probably have a basic idea in terms of what we can, what we wish to do, what we can do, and what we cannot do. Or like I like to advise most people to utilize what I call the Moscow technique. And Moscow is just an acronym for, if you use the Moscow, M-U-S, Moscow, M-U-C-S. So if you spell Moscow, M is what you must do, C is what you could do, S is what you should do, and W is what you would do. And there are many things that people remain a long time in what you would do and not realizing the things you would do. But what you should concentrate on are just 2 areas: what you must do and what you could do in your environment. The other 2 areas are things which are good to know, but you must know that in terms of what you are able to do, it's way down the line. It's a long-term requirement. So with that in mind, let's look at what we have in terms of demand side management in terms of a definition. It's an umbrella term for different measures that can be applied on a load to positively alter the usage patterns of the consumers. So what you want to do is make sure that you can apply these measures on your load at the meter to alter the usage pattern. Usually the goal of demand side management is to encourage the consumer to use less energy during peak hours, or to move the time of energy use to the off-peak times, such as nighttime and weekends. Now this particular movement becomes easier if I have what is called a time of use tariff. But if we don't have that, then we have to come up with different methodologies which we can utilize. Peak demand management does not necessarily decrease your total energy consumption. All we are doing, we are trying to flatten the curve so that I don't have coincidental peaks occurring, so that my requirement for generation from the electric utility goes high up, so that I would have to switch generating plants on and off. And one must realize that putting plants on and off does two things, or will do two things. One, it's going to increase your cost of generation, and two, it's going to cause premature failure of your generation plant. Now, peak demand management does not necessarily decrease your load, as said before, but we can expect a reduction in the needs for investment in networks, because I can now reduce the power which I have to transfer across to my load, and or the power plants meeting the peak demands. That is what I just spoke about in terms of switching peaking plants on or off. Essentially, this is the optimization of the electricity usage on the customer end, so as to reduce production cost and resource expenditure. These actions or activities or programs, either directly or indirectly, stimulated by the utility, would be put together in a group, and we call that this demand side management. It's becoming popular and important in terms of integral intervention strategy in the power system operations in developing countries, and newer technologies are being introduced with the objectives of optimization, energy optimization, peak power reduction, which redound into improved reliability, reduction in emissions, and that seems to be a very big thing now, reduction in emissions, etc. Reduction in emissions has to do with the fact that if I can reduce the number of plants I have to bring up or take down, I am going to reduce emissions. So one of the issues in terms of peaking plant, that is when I have my coincident peaks, and I want to flatten it. If I don't flatten the peak, it means that I will have to add additional plants. And the assumption here is that when I add additional plants, I'm adding fossil fuel type plants, because these are the only plants which are dispatchable, and I will have them running there or waiting there to be added. So in terms of our demand and our vision to provide reliable power supply 24/7, we are looking to ensure that we have affordable rates, a focus on increased share of renewable energy, and promotion of e-mobility, etc. Now, one of the issues with renewable energy in terms of the environment, which I have stated before in our lectures before, is that both photovoltaics and wind plants are not dispatchable plants, and therefore we cannot use them for peak shaving or reducing my peak. And that's why when we are talking about reducing our peak and reducing our carbon footprint, what we are talking about is trying not to have or start another fossil fuel plant to meet the demand of the utility. So when we look at the generation supply side management and demand side management versus the supply side, the end use is where we are putting our demand side management in this particular area. But the generation and transmission are the areas which are going to provide the power. So the generation and transmission of the power fall on the supply side, and these target the producers of the energy. That's the power utility. The technical changes such as generation infrastructure improvements, introduction of clean fuel and efficient transformer technologies come into play at this end, this part of the group, but encouraging money to be saved at both ends. So if I reduce my peak demand at the end use, which would be my consumers are all here, then it means I don't need to bring in more generation. So I don't need to probably install new generation if my generation is increasing. And if I have reduction in my growth here, it means my existing transmission lines can carry the utility load that you need to service it. And I don't need to do reconductoring, means putting more cables down or increasing the size of my transformers, etc. So all of that falls back into what will be called the rate base for the utility, because if I'm not increasing the uh, utilities rate base, meaning the equipment that the utility has on its system, it means I am not going to increase the rate base. And if I don't increase the rate base, then the regulator would not have the urge to increase the tariffs on the system. So demand side management, if we look at it carefully, we target the consumer, the end users. This is where we are looking at. And we are looking at probably incentivizing the consumers. However we may do it, each organization would do it differently, so that they can make change in terms of their energy usage patterns, whereby they can save money and the utility can save money. Now, a lot of people believe or think, if they think about it very quickly, they think that if I were to cause my consumers to reduce the energy consumption, that the utility is going to gather or going to have a lower income stream. And that's not true. Remember what we're saying, we are not reducing the total energy utilized. What we are doing is dispersing the energy use, in that we don't want everyone to use the energy at the same time. We want them to use it throughout the 24-hour period and incentivize them to move their usage patterns from a particular time of the day to some other time. One of the easiest ways to do it, like I said before, is tariffs, is to change your tariff structure to make people pay more when I have the peak and less when I don't have the peak. So that's the easiest way to do it. But if you are in an area where, or in a country where the tariffs are fixed, it's the same, it doesn't matter when you use it, where you use it, how you use it, like Trinidad, then you have to come up with different methodologies in which to actually implement that particular aspect. So what we are going to do here, we're going to play a short video in terms of which will encompass a lot of the issues we're looking at, so as to concretize into your mind what we need to do. So just have a look at this video here.
As the day begins, homes, offices, industries and farmers plug in various appliances. The demand for electricity steadily builds up. Later in the evening, as household lights and air conditioners are switched on, electricity demand starts growing further and reaches a peak. The demand for electricity goes up and down not just during the day. It can have a different pattern on weekends or on special occasions like festivals. Demand also varies according to seasons, weather conditions, geographic locations, or lifestyles of people. In future, new technologies like electric vehicles may also change the pattern of demand. Or for that matter, even supply could vary if power is coming not just from conventional sources of energy, but also from renewable and intermittent sources like solar or wind. It is the duty of any power utility to meet the varying demand of its consumers at any instant of time. In case there is a gap, it must procure power from the market at additional cost, leading to higher tariff for consumers. Or if power is not readily available, it has to resort to load shedding. So then, how can a utility fulfill its responsibility of providing reliable and affordable power to its consumers? It can only do so through demand-side management, or DSM, a concept which helps to better manage demand by either reducing electricity consumption or shifting it from peak to off-peak hours. DSM opportunities can be identified through comprehensive load research. This involves understanding the load curve of a utility, mainly its patterns of daily and seasonal variations of demand, and the behavior of different consumer categories, essentially drawn from a consumer survey to know which loads are contributing to peak demand. In a recent study done by Terry for Mescom in 2017, a power utility in Karnataka, whose consumer mix comprises domestic, agriculture, industrial and commercial sectors, the load research revealed significant seasonal variation. Monsoon months showed the least demand, followed by winter. The summer months from March to May were peak months, primarily because of the domestic load and the agriculture load of the Rabi season. The study also revealed different consumer behaviors. For example, the consumer survey found out that most of the small and medium enterprises under MESCOM have enormous opportunities to replace energy inefficient motors with efficient ones. In agriculture too, the users are small and marginal farmers, majority using more than 10-year-old pump sets. In some cases, motors had been rewound more than 3 times. Based on these insights, the demand-side management plan suggested a range of interventions. It encouraged industries to go for energy audits through a cluster-based approach, use energy-efficient motors, and explore the scope of demand response, meaning using IT-enabled services that allows industry to reduce consumption dynamically at the time of system peak and shifted to off-peak hours. For agriculture, the plan proposed promotion of energy-efficient pump sets and irrigation techniques and solar water pumping systems. In the domestic sector, the plan suggested wide adoption of energy-efficient air conditioners and LED lighting. MESCOM can now prioritize these interventions, seek regulatory approvals. The concept of demand-side management in India is not new, but even today, it is yet to pick up because of lack of proper metering and availability of digital records of granular data. However, demand-side management is a critical need of the hour, and indeed, it is a win-win for all. It saves utilities from purchasing expensive power to meet demand. The consumers do not have to suffer power cuts. The government can deliver its promise of 24/7 power, and manufacturers can have a ready market for energy-efficient appliances. But above all, by reducing the need to generate more power that often comes from polluting fossil fuels, the big promise of demand-side management is a cleaner and safer environment for all.
Okay, so I trust that you would have absorbed most of the suggestions in that short video. As a matter of fact, that short video summarizes nearly everything we would like to talk about here. Once you localize what the video has been saying, you're actually on the road to doing demand-side management. As you can see, the demand-side management in that video, they talk about basically 3 types of seasons. They talk about winter, summer, and the monsoons. So one has to be cognizant that, okay, in the Caribbean, we have 2. We have the rainy season and the sunny season. And I would like to add one more season, and that's in the pre-COVID era. The other season we had was the holiday season. And what is important in terms of the video are that you require data. To do demand-side management, I must know intimately what are the usage patterns of all my consumers. And my consumers are the consumers in the 3 bases that we have, which would be our industrial, the commercial, and the domestic. And in some utilities, they have hived off the street lighting as one of the areas. But the street lighting is a fixed area where United comes on. So that's one you could probably neglect that one. But our demand side management are in those 3 areas. But what is important is that I need to know what are the patterns, the diurnal patterns of all my consumers, and how these three patterns, when I put them together, when I integrate them together, how they can affect our total grid consumption, and how that grid consumption can be changed in terms of demand side management. So let's look at the demand side management in the integrated resource and resilience planning process. So we have a slide here which have different inputs in terms of it. We have a brief description if you look at all of them. Let's look at the demand side management. We have these three areas: demand side energy savings, cost of supply, environmental. And these feed into separate areas which end up into the rate of return. And then this feedback comes back to my demand side management. So if I look at the energy saving aspect, alternatives, what we are looking at really in terms of, firstly, my demand side management, we look at our load projections. And remember, when we look at the little video talked about what are the usage patterns from each one of our consumers or each group of consumers, and how does that usage pattern varies during the seasonal times of the year. And we only have 2 seasons here, and I postulated another season, which is the vacation period. And then I utilize that, and that feeds into my expansion plan. But in my expansion plan, I have feeding in that the cost of supply for alternatives, and which would be the power to a consumer's home or place of business or regional. Example, solar power into my house. Solar power generation, remember, only occurs when you have sun. As a matter of fact, a lot of people miss the fact that solar power operates only when you have direct irradiance onto the photovoltaics. Not because the place is bright and the place is hot that I can get electricity from solar power systems. I can get solar water heaters to work, but not photovoltaics. So I have that electricity that I can use, and that's only during the hot period of time. And I can use my inverters, convert that to AC, and that can use that for home usage, and then back off the normal home usage so that I can have a reduction in terms of my consumption pattern. And this reduction in consumption pattern can cause the utility not to have to increase the number of generators on bars, or even to defer my generation expansion. If I look at my environmental and social impacts, we have less electricity being generated via the plants, the fossil fuel plants that would have had to bring up if I did not have my renewable energy plants on stream. And it means less waste products such as greenhouse gases or particulate matter, which is being thrown up in the air, which would include the heavy metals, which you have there also. And therefore that redounds into my footprint reduction. And this means a less contribution to climate change in the long term, which is something that we all are striving towards. Socially, we can consider how this environmental change affects human life through pollution, infrastructure, livelihood, etc. Additionally, introduction of new power generation locations can displace people. People can save money, introducing new power generation locations, and we can save money through demand side management and incentives. Now, one of the issues that comes up a lot of time in the Caribbean is the fact that our carbon footprint in terms of a total value is insignificant when we look at in terms of the global carbon footprint, and therefore that means we should do nothing. Well, we should do nothing in the sense that if our objective is to reduce the carbon footprint in the world. But if we want to reduce our carbon footprint and we utilize the fact that if I reduce my carbon footprint, I am actually improving my local environment and decreasing pollution and increasing the livelihood and increasing my longevity, then it becomes a little better incentive when we look at it from that particular aspect. Also, when we look at load projections, we are looking at the prediction of the magnitude and geographical locations of energy usage over a specified period. And if we look at energy savings alternatives, then we are reducing the requirement for generation expansion. We also reduce our production costs because of the fact that we are not bringing up these generators. Remember, all generators that are utilized in a power plant which uses fossil fuel have what is called a cost curve, meaning for different production output, the cost per kilowatt hour produces changes. And the most efficient point typically in a generation plant is when it is producing about 90% of its rated capacity. And therefore, if I go beyond that 90%, like I'm going to peak in, then I am actually increasing my cost of production. But more importantly, I am increasing the environmental footprint to produce a little extra energy. If I utilize the power plant for values lower than 90%, let's say 50, 40% of production output. So let's say I have a 20 megawatt plant, but I'm only running it at 10 megawatt. The particulate output from that is much higher than if I were to run it at the close to 18 megawatts. So these are the type of things you're throwing up all the time. And finally, when I look at my rate of return and pricing, my rate of return is going to be down in that because I have a net loss or gain depending on what I put up in terms of my plant, because the more generators I put on the bars, the more energy I'm utilizing. The more energy I'm utilizing, it means the more fuel I'm utilizing, and therefore the more cost per kilowatt or megawatt hour that I'm producing. So pricing and incentives are the motivating factors and are tangible results of demand side management. The feedback are the money saved and the earnings that you get from the utility in terms of the rate of return. And then I could utilize that and come back again into my full loop in terms of my demand side management. So in a nutshell, we can see from this particular side how all the different levels in the utility system and the users can be utilized together to produce in terms of this closed loop system that we're looking at to give me lower cost of generation, lower impacts into the environment, and a cleaner environment for the users and the country. And overall, a better operation in terms of my utility. So if we move on to that, we look at how my demand side management fits into the bigger picture. When we look at the bigger picture, we have this chart where you can see several aspects which come into play. We have the setting of the objectives, the gathering of the data. I do not want to reduce the importance of data. Everything you're doing here requires data, and we require accurate data, because accurate data, many of the changes I'm going to do, many of the operations I'm going to do might be real time or within a day. So I want to ensure that I have good data with which I'm going to operate. And from that data, I can get my demand forecasting, and I can go into two different areas in investigating what demand side management techniques I can utilize, evaluating this, or investigating the technologies I can utilize to supply my utility and how these are going to apply, preparation and evaluation of the candidates that I'm going to utilize in terms of my integrated resources planning, implementation. And once I've implemented, I have to monitor feedback data again. I want back my data. So data becomes an important aspect. So demand side management would see an improvement in the electricity grid as a whole, with focus on resource conservation and environmental protection. It encourages efficiency in the home through energy efficiency appliances, reducing the costs paid by consumers for power in the long run. It sees the reduction of consumption and energy production, and hence the reduction in the emissions throughout society. While expenditure in the short term is definitely needed to implement these to facilitate my demand side management effectively, long term, it sees the cost of energy production reduced. It would encourage the proper monitoring of load and demand. Demand side management education programs can motivate consumers to become more learned on the power generation system and climate change, and learn how to do their part in making the change. Now, the main thing here is part of the demand side management loop is to educate the consumers, because an educated consumer is a consumer who works with you. One of the ways to drive this in that a lot of utilities do is to drive it in terms of the consumer feels it in the pocket, and therefore you pay for your misdemeanors on the utility, meaning you're using power when it is most expensive. But it is better to utilize more friendly technique where I pay some attention in educating my consumers and educating them in terms of how they can change their patterns by utilizing simple techniques, which you as a utility can help them with, and utilizing that technique to reduce their own bills, and it in terms of redounding in a positive effect in terms of footprint reduction on the utility and the country, and by extension, global environment. So we see it as a win-win situation in terms of both sides. So when we look at the benefits of demand side management, we see that there are 6 areas in terms of we can see the benefits are. From the utility, we see the deferral of investment in generation and networks. And this deferral has to do with the fact that if I do not have to put new generation on the bars, or put new generation in my plant, or to put in new generating plant to serve the peak loads, then I don't have to put in new generation, then I don't increase my rate base, and therefore I don't have to look for increase in tariffs. You can also see a reduction in technical losses. Technical losses has to do with the heating losses that occurs when I'm transmitting power from the generators to the consumers. It's an inherent loss that occurs on the line because every conductor has resistance. And once I pass current through that resistance, I have what is called an I squared R loss. And if I'm going to have peaking loads, then the I squared R losses are going to increase because the current that I have to transfer are going to be, it's going to be much higher than what it was before. And therefore I increase my technical losses. Now, why we put technical losses is because technical losses are losses that are inherent in the transmission of power from the generator to the consumer. There's another loss there which is called non-technical losses, and non-technical losses are losses in electricity, which has to do with stealing of electricity. Okay, so non-technical is a nice way of saying that. The other area is the improvement in the network reliability due to reduced loads and associated outages. So if I reduce the power that I have to transfer from one A to B, then I also reduce the loading, and if I reduce the probability that I would get a failure because of overload. The lowers the utility from the utilities point of view, I have a lower cost of operation as peak power purchase agreement is avoided. Remember, if I have a power purchase agreement with a generator, let's assume my utility is broken up into generators and the transmission and distribution company, or Genco, the Transco, and the Disco companies. then I'm buying power from a generator. And even if you have a fully integrated utility, you still have a cost of getting power from your generation. And the peak power is going to cost you more than having just average power. So I'm going to reduce that cost. It's going to lower the expenditure on new power plants and distribution and transmission technology because I'm going to reduce my load on my system. And it's going to improve efficiency on the entire grid and increase customer satisfaction on my system. So from the user point of view, I have social benefits as the consumers can improve their standard of living and more can afford the service through efficient use of power. So it means I don't have to increase my rates that often to take into account the fact that I have very high coincident loads. I can have a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, and this is a very important one at this time. So even this alone can drive you into greenhouse gas emissions reduction. And I can utilize this to promote renewable energy and sustainable energy development. So the customer also saves money, not just the utility, because I'm going to incentivize the customers financially to monitor and reduce their usage of energy and their time of use. I'm going to integrate in renewable energy resources onto the system from the customer point of view, and most importantly, educate the customer about what are the pros and cons of overconsumption, energy wastage, and the time I'm going to consume it, meaning which time of the day I'm going to consume the most amount or the most quantity of electricity. Remember, one of the major uses of electricity in an environment like ours, from a domestic point of view, actually is air conditioning systems. So that's an area you have to look at very carefully in terms of as people become a little financially more independent or they have more spending power, a lot of people are putting in air conditioning systems. So your demand side management will be looking a lot at air conditioning systems. We'll think more about that in the other slides. So let's look at the areas we are looking at, and we're looking at several graphs that we are looking at. We want to change the and let's assume this is our graph that we had before. We have a very large peak. So this is my consumption pattern. I have a large peak here and I want to reduce this peak because of this peak, I have to bring in generation, and let's assume this time here is midday. I have to bring in generation to service this peak. So I want to, through demand side management, to reduce this peak from where it is to a more smaller peak value. And because I have very low consumption here, this area is called a valley. And so if I reduce this peak, I want to increase this area of the curve here, which looks at this point as a normal distribution curve. So I want to increase this here. So that's what valley filling is about, like this. And therefore, if I have increased the valley, decreased the valley, so reduce the peak, I have a flatter curve in terms of my system. So what happens with all that are these three outputs. I have strategic conservation. I have strategic load growth. I am now going to control how my load growth is going to happen. And I'm going to have the ability to change my flexibility of my load growth. So in fact, what we are doing with demand side management is to change the shape of the load profile of the grid system. Desirable changes include peak clipping, valley filling, and load shifting. And load shifting is I'm moving away my peak from midday to some other period of time, or from 6 a.m. or 7 p.m. to some other time. So I'm changing it completely. Some ways you can do peak clipping. It can cause a reduction in the demand in the peak times in the system. So if I look at valley filling technology, which aims to increase the demand during off-peak to low valley periods, one of the areas we have to look at as things increase is electric vehicles, battery storage. And just remember, an electric vehicle and a battery storage system is the same thing, except that a battery storage most of the time is used to produce electricity for a consumer to use in their home or onto the grid. An electric vehicle can be utilized for both transportation and in the future will be utilized as battery storage also. But once I get electric vehicles increasing in terms of the penetration of electric vehicles, it will operate no different to battery storage. We have water heating and storage methods of how we can operate our water heating from outside peak time. And one of the ways to shift that water heating, because we are in the Caribbean, is to move away from electric water heating to solar water heating and put incentives for doing that. And if we look at our load shifting, we can look at mechanism to move the current existing loads into off-peak periods so that we can have a flat curve and a flexible load curve in terms of dynamic control and responses to a consumer's load and to their distributed generation and storage. So we can put all these together in terms of a nice system which works together to give me not a curve like this, but a more flat curve where I pull the top down and raise the valley so that I have a very flat curve where as flat as possible, where I can see my consumption from my consumers look more like a base load. And that gives me two aspects very immediately. One, it gives me a fixed number of generators I need to put onto the power system at any time. And because I have a fixed number of generators and I have all of them operating at the same level, it means I'm going to, for the same energy output, I'm going to reduce the emissions from my generation. So let's look at the categories of demand side management. We have several categories in terms of my system and time of use. So we have, if we look at our curve, we have the timing, how long in terms of the response and in terms of the impact on the process. The biggest impact in terms of long-term is energy efficiencies. And energy efficiency is the one which we call the low-hanging fruit. As a matter of fact, that's where we should target immediately. That's where we can get immediate bang for our buck in terms of our output, because we can very quickly do these kind of things, minimal output, and it's going to redound to both long-term savings and permanent savings for both the utility as well as the consumer. And both of these redound to savings in terms of emissions for the environment. We can also look at time of use tariffs, and time of use tariffs vary per day in terms of different times of the day, and they give me a usage pattern where I can optimize my personal use so as to minimize my cost of energy. Now, you're not minimizing the amount of energy that the person is using, but you are minimizing the cost, what is going to cost them, and how they do that is by distributing the time which they're going to use this energy. And therefore, that can be implemented by time of use. And you give the user the ability to control their own time of use. So time of use pricing. And then I can look at the demand response, which is will be a little shorter with, again, I'm going to flatten the curves from that. And my demand response and go up to the physical demand response that people need and to the spinning reserve. The spinning reserve has to do with the utility generation that you have on bars. Now, the spinning reserve basically is that, for instance, if I have a 100 megawatt generator running, but I'm only utilizing 70 megawatts from this 100 megawatt generator. It means for this particular generator, 100 minus 70, it's 30 megawatts. It means I have the ability to run 30 megawatts of power spinning reserve, and that's already on the bus bar. So I have this spinning reserve there waiting on me. And as my consumption increases, I have these generators which will react very quickly to that generation, to that requirement. So I'm going to just pause there a minute if you have any questions, burning questions that you want to raise at this time.
Thank you, Professor. Yes, we have several questions.
Okay.
So the first one, have any Caribbean countries already implemented time of use tariff rates? If not, what is the progress towards this?
Okay, we have that as a slide coming up. So let's defer that until that slide because we are looking at the Caribbean in terms of what have been implemented in other countries. So let's hold that one.
Okay. Okay. So the next question, do you think it will be easy to get consumers in the Caribbean to change their habits in line with the DSM interventions? This is a two-part question. So have there been any studies that assess possible barriers or best practices we can refer to in the region?
Okay. Now, in terms of consumers, in terms of any consumer, it has nothing to do with electricity or anything. Any consumer, once you're a consumer, changing pattern of consumption can be done very easily by changing cost of utilizing whatever it is you are actually using. So tariffs really, time of use tariff really works well in terms of doing that. And initially you'll find that when the time of use tariffs are implemented, wherever they are implemented, there is an initial over quarrel from the consumers in terms of the cost of electricity. But finally, once you educate them before you implement it, the consumers and themselves, with the advance of all technology that we have, which is really like smartphones and so forth, where the utility is going to broadcast the changes in the electricity patterns that you have. And I can program in terms of the Internet of Things, I can program all my appliances to come on at only specific times, my washing machine, my dryers, whatever I have. Then you'll find that the consumers are going to work with it well, and it's going to work. However, we in the later part of this presentation, we're going to look at that in a little more detail.
Okay, thank you. Next question. How would you propose to efficiently undertake such an intensive data collection process for an average size Caribbean island where granular demand side data doesn't yet exist?
Actually, that's a question which most utility distribution engineers ask. There are many easy ways to do it. Actually, you have the information. Most people don't even realize they have the information. It's just they have not really went down into doing it. If you are a utility like TNTech, where you have advanced metering infrastructure already installed, the information is already in their data files because everything is digitized already and in their data file. If you don't have an advanced metering infrastructure, but you're already billing people, you have the data. You may not have the data in terms of 15-minute values, but your meters have already aggregated the values. So I can utilize the bills that I have, and I have the bills already broken up into, and I'm going to use three areas, domestic, commercial, and industrial. And from those bills and for my billing time, let's say it's a 60-day billing cycle or a 30-day billing cycle. If I aggregate those bills, I can see what my diurnal patterns are for each consumer. And once I put all those together, and that's an Excel spreadsheet, it isn't difficult. Once I put all that together, then I have enough data to start doing what we are projecting to do, or we are proposing that you can do. But it requires you to actually go down into your data. And as a matter of fact, most utilities have to do this in any case when they're going for a rate increase. They have to show their commercial consumption, their resident consumption, their industrial consumption, because that's the only way they can determine what's the efficient tariff for each one of the group. If it's not being done as detailed as that, then we should start doing it, but we have the data.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so one key factor in the development of the time of use rates for DSM is the marginal cost difference of generation during off-peak and peak periods. If there isn't a significant marginal cost difference, there is no incentive for the development of a TOU rate. How many utilities in the region would you say have a significant peak with a significant marginal cost difference to facilitate developing a TOU rate?
I would say all. The only utility which has a nice curve, and it still has a marginal rate, is Trinidad, because we have a very large industrial group which consumes almost 33% of all the power. So that's our base load. They are on 24/7. There is no other Caribbean utility which has that. They all have domestic and commercial customers, which are the major consumers in the country. And once you have domestic and commercial consumers, you are going to see a very nice marginal difference.
Okay. What are the major drawbacks associated with time of use rates?
The major drawback is really the implementation. It's getting an
Okay.
agreement from the regulator to implement that. But there's no other drawback after that, because the only drawback that a consumer has is not understanding the time of use, and the fact that they have to invest some money in terms of if they want to utilize the full benefit of time of use. And that would require having some programmable equipment, appliances. But a consumer can do that without even having fancy equipment, because there are many devices available now where you have the devices can be placed on the internet, which are smart plugs, we call them. And you can utilize a smart plug with a normal phone and put them on and off when you want it. So you don't even have to program it. You could program the smart plug, or you can actually put it on and off when the rates change. So it's an education process that you have to do. Younger people would have no problems with it. It's ready to get the older people like me to understand how easy it is.
All right. Okay. Please clarify the relationship between demand response and demand side management, as in the video, the terms appear to have been used interchangeably.
One is an action and one is what is actually happening. Demand response is what is actually happening on the system. Demand side management is how I'm going to change that response to what I want it to do, want it to be.
Okay, thank you. For valley filling, it appears that the area under the graph is increased and therefore energy consumption. In addition, peak clipping appears to focus on power and not energy. So is it that DSM focuses on both power and energy?
All right, let me see how I handle this.
Mhm.
Power is energy per second.
Mhm.
So when we say power, we are talking about the energy per second. Energy is the power per hour, so it becomes kilowatt hours. Now, when we are talking about, the person talked about, or the questionnaire asked about the area under the curve. No, the area under the curve actually is the same. What is happening is going to drop the peak, and as the peak drops down, the valley goes up. So if I sum the area under the curve, it actually is the same, except some consumer might not want to use whatever they're doing at that time. But if the consumers continuing to use the appliances in terms of the period of time they want to use it, not the time of day, but the period of time they want to use it, the power consumption is the same.
Okay. Okay, thank you so
Except
much, Prof.
I'm going to use higher efficient appliances, which is an option that they would come to once they start seeing the cost of the current appliance that they have compared to the cost of a energy efficient appliance. And it's significant.
Okay. Right. Okay, thank you for answering those questions. You've covered all of them so far, so we can resume the presentation.
Okay, so let's continue. So we looked at that. So let's look at the categories of energy efficient investment. And this was taken from a foreign country. If you can see here, we took it from the EIA, okay? But what we are saying is that you need to understand how your consumption is to really start to focus on where you need to target your energy reduction. So this is a 2015 breakdown of electricity consumption in US households. And in 2017, the average consumption per household was 867 kilowatt hours per month. Now, and if you notice, a lot of this has to do with space heating, which we would not have, right? The majority of these utilities that what they are using would be air conditioning, lighting, television, fridges, washing machine, refrigerators. And if I were to replace these in terms of changing them into energy efficient appliances, then I will get a significant reduction. As a matter of fact, there's a big reduction in consumption of air conditioning by providing the same space cooling. If I change my air conditioning system from the normal compressors that I have to inverter-based compressors. Of course, this requires an investment. But if you help and work with the consumers to show them how this investment pays off in the long run, if I do the change, then you'll get this air conditioning load dropping off by a lot while still enjoying the benefits of air conditioning. One of the other issues we have is power factor correction. Now, power factor correction serves two areas, and a lot of people confuse them, and I just want to look at it in two aspects. I'm going to look at it two simple aspects. In the industrial and commercial sector, you are penalized for bad power factor, and you're penalized by having too high a kVA demand. And your kVA demand is billed. And if you look at it a lot, the kVA cost, meaning that the amount of kVA or power that the utility must ensure that they provide to you, is charged at a very high rate. And if I don't reduce that, my utility bill is very high. And this is mainly power factor. If I reduce my power factor, my kVA bill goes down, but my energy will remain the same. Now, in a domestic consumer, we don't have a power factor cost. However, a lot of people don't understand that your power factor cost is actually incorporated in your bill. So in coming up with your energy consumed in a domestic customer, they actually multiply the RMS value of the current by the RMS value of the voltage, which involves actually the power factor is already inside that calculation. And that gives you the kilowatt hours. And if you have motors, and your main motors you would have, there would be your washing machines, your dryers, your pumps, your water pumps if you have any, your air conditioning, your refrigerator. If you buy high power factor machineries for those, then you are going to get a lower power factor and you're going to get a lower bill while providing the same work that you had before. If you have old equipment and you understand a little about power factor, you actually can do some power factor correction locally on those equipment and reduce your bill. But that requires some education. Many a times it is actually cheaper to just buy a new appliance than to go through the power factor correction. So incremental spending on energy efficient equipment or the full expenditure on refurbishment with installation of new energy saving equipment reduces the overall energy usage in every area, both the industrial, commercial, and domestic area. This can save the utility companies money in the long run, as money is saved due to reduced energy usage. And this also redounds to the consumer too, because they will get a reduced bill. So this could also see a long-term implementation of what we call the smart grid, with the integration of renewable energy resources and at the end user, and also to the Internet of Things, where the consumer can now control every appliance in the house via an app on the phone. This would see fossil fuel consumption cut down as consumers produce power for themselves. And also, because they are reducing their energy consumption, of course, you have reduced energy flow from the system, reduced production, reduced fossil carbon output. And if consumers have photovoltaics onto their system, if we have net metering or net billing, we could have that fed back into the grid, and you can actually reduce and make some money also. So there are several areas where this can go in terms of my operation. So let's look back at my time of use, which one of the participants asked about. Okay. There are categories in terms of the time of use. What we have in time of use are some brackets in terms of areas where the electricity prices with the cost of generation in specific time zones. So usually it's when the peak occurs, my electricity price, my price per kilowatt hour jumps up. And the cost of electricity when I have my valleys, it's very low. So what the utility is trying to do is to move you from using at the peak to the valley. Incentivize the customers. It provides incentive to transition to the smart grid technology and efficient energy investment, and that also redounds in what is called the Internet of Things, IoT. And the customer can plan their energy usage through the day and have their appliances coming on and off programmed in terms of matching the time when the utility has a different rate. In more advanced utilities, the rates are broadcast at different periods of time in a day. And when it broadcasts, you can have your equipment sensing what the broadcast value is and turn on automatically depending what is the cost of electricity at that time. And it's no different in terms of buying on the stock market. You know, I'm going to buy when it's low and sell when it's high and things like that. So customers can now plan their usage to minimize their costs and minimize the expenses in terms of the system. And it's easy to implement. But when we say easy, it might be easier for the younger crowd to do it than older persons. So you're just required to incentivize and also educate your customers to help you in this process. So there are several categories of time of use, and this curve comes up a lot of time in terms of the time of use and what happens. And this is called the duck curve. And what it is was the fact that it's really based on a Californian curve in terms of the tariffs in California. And what happened in 2013, if we look at the tariffs in 2013, okay, 2014, the tariff is the top of the curve here. And as the Californian authority, CAISO, the California Independent System Operator, as they started to use time of use, as well as allowed the customers to install photovoltaic system on them, what they realized is that we know that the time of use for air conditioning matches the midday sun. So what happened in the California experience is that as the consumers started to install more photovoltaics onto their system, they required less and less generation from the power plant during the midday, because more of the energy which is required for air conditioning is now being provided locally at the consumer by the photovoltaics that they have installed. So this shows you how a particular utility, by looking at the demand and looking at the demand in off peak and peak, and how you can change this through a period of time. Now, if you look at what happened here, if they did not do this, then you would have seen this huge ramp up that they had to put on because of the fact that immediately after this period, the system went up at 8 o'clock, when everybody went home again into your system. So I can manage that, and I move my peak from drastic midday to an off peak at midday, where the power moved from $60 per megawatt hour to $15 per megawatt hour. And this shows you how you can actually manage the peak and manage it in terms of putting in or allowing consumers to put in their own generation and get your consumption down and help the utility in terms of what is operation. So when they talk about the duck curve, this is what they're referring to, and the duck curve has to do with the consumption pattern reduced from the top of the duck, which is in 2013, to the bottom of the duck when it is 2020, in terms of my implementation pattern. So let's look at our demand response categories. In terms of our aim is to smoothen out any dips or peaks in the load profile, which involves the financial incentivization of the customer based by the utility. And this we call a temporary measure, because remember, it's only for a certain time of the day this thing happens. So I'm actually trying to control the demand response. So the market demand response responds to the pricing signals and incentives, or the real-time pricing of the market. So that's my market demand response. In areas that can provide prices up to a day in advance, signaling and incentives can be applied early. And this is what I talk about when I said the utility can broadcast the prices to everyone. So we're talking about a system where the utility will tell you in advance. They don't have a fixed rate, but they have a time of use rate that it changes dynamically. And they broadcast in advance every hour or so what their new pricing would be in the next 2 hours. And utilizing this broadcast, the consumers can dynamically, and many times if they program their system properly, automatically utilize these new broadcast prices to utilize energy. And in the energy spot markets, this is what is utilized a lot. So this brought about a new market for energy, new market for electricity, which is similar to the bond market and the price market and consumer goods. And you can actually have a market where I'm going to buy and sell electricity dynamically, depending on what is happening in our system. The physical demand response can involve mandated control and management of the consumer demand when the grid or its technical infrastructure is performing badly or damaged. Hence, demand can be reined in to prevent further problems of blending both market and physical demand response to optimize grid functionality. So I can have a market or a physical or both of things happening. I have an interruptibility contract where I can have consumers buying electricity at a cheaper rate, but part of the contract is that if the utility needs power for something else, they can interrupt my power, and that's all right in my contract because I'm paying a lower rate. Or I can have direct load control where the utility can say, okay, I can reduce your load because I need more power somewhere else, and all that is charged for in terms of my utility system. Now, the spinning reserve is something that I touched on before when we look at the quickest form for demand side management. And remember, we looked at it was at the top of the curve, where I can very quickly, in seconds, in terms of cycles, I can really do this because this reserve is already there on the bar. Remember, I talk about 100 megawatt or a 20 megawatt system where I only using 15 megawatts, or 100 megawatts where I only using 75 megawatts. I still have 25 megawatts that I can very quickly come from or can take from. The extra power capacity that becomes available when I utilize this, and should consumer demand change, these generators provide this capacity in response immediately. And this is my quick demand response and how I can do these demand response quickly on my system. So I have the long term, which was my efficiency. I have the medium to longer term, and I have the very fast one, which is my spin and reserve. So in a nutshell, we have looked at all that. So to put them all together, let's look at what are the fundamental challenges in terms of demand side management. And I spoke about them, I've mentioned them in passant, okay? First one is the ICT infrastructure. Remember I talked about broadcasting, I talk about putting plugs online, internet plugs. I talked about programming your appliances. I talked about the Internet of Things. Well, these are many of the ICT infrastructure that I need. My type of metering can also be changed in terms of that, how I control the meters, how I control the communications on these meters, how difficult it is to procure, to implement. Do I have an advanced metering infrastructure already installed on my system? If I have it installed already on the utility, then it's easier to implement. If not, the utility has to put in this infrastructure before it can get anywhere further to that. And last, and by no means least, what I've been harping on about is the lack of understanding and education of across the consumer base. And we need to spend time to educate the consumers in terms of what the new infrastructure is like, what are the requirements, how you can leverage what the infrastructure can do to minimize my cost, whilst at the same time enjoying the same level of life, the same level of comfort, but reducing my cost and reducing my carbon footprint. Now, another challenge that you have is that most people don't like change. They love the status quo. So I need to drag people basically from that method to a new method of thinking. It also increases the complexity of my utility system. And I can only drive it, like everything where I have humans involved, people only change their modus operandi if they feel it in their pocket. So what is the incentive? I need to have incentives to drive them in that direction. And who are the people required to do this, and what are their respective roles? Everyone must understand what each one's role is, what you need to do to implement, to change the pattern that the consumer has. And each one has to benefit, because one side alone cannot benefit if this thing needs to work. The role of the government. And why we bring this up is because many of the utilities in the Caribbean are monopoly. So we have a monopolistic operation here. And many of the times, the monopolistic operation, you have to ensure how the monopoly operates and how you can get the monopoly to change its way of operating for the benefit of the consumers. It depends on also the agreement that the monopoly has already with the supply of electricity. Some monopolies have a total control on the system. So in Barbados, the Barbados Light and Power has a total control on it. In Trinidad, we would say that the government has a total control, save and except that all the generation, except for a small 64 megawatt in Tobago, all the generation in Trinidad lies with private producers. So you have different roles. If you go to Jamaica, the utility again has as a distributor and a transmitter, as well as a supplier or producer of electricity, has control, but there are several private power producers. So again, the way you do it would be different. But the government can also improve the operation by changing our standards and buildings. Most of the buildings we have were not designed really to reduce energy use. So you find a lot of people are air conditioning buildings which are not designed for reducing ingress of heat or loss of heat. And what you need is an energy efficiency standard for even building a building infrastructure. You need incentives for energy efficiency and for the demand side management measures like taxes, energy taxes, grants or loans, rebates, publicity awareness and campaigns. You need to start educating, advertising, PR for this thing, and the funding of the transition of assets to energy efficiency. The role of the utility, well, the tariff design, but of course, tariff design also redounds to the regulator, has to be involved in that very closely. And in terms of the power usage data, which must choose the rating based on the peak and off-peak hours, the demand on the system, technology adoption, the operators must constantly seek to improve and optimize power transmission equipment and the generation process in order to maintain energy efficiency standard. And finally, the foundation for all of this is data collection. Energy consumption metrics should be constantly be collected and monitored to optimize the smart grid system. Now, if you look at what we have looked at, we have shown that everyone is involved in this, from the utility, the government, the regulator, the consumer. They all have to work in tandem to get this system, the demand side management, to operate, to work efficiently, to redound to the benefit of all involved, which would be the government, the utility, the consumer, and finally, the environment. Okay, so I'll stop here. Any questions, further questions?
Okay, thank you, Professor. There is a comment. In the case of the duck curve, the installation of consumer PV system will affect the generating units that are needed, as mentioned. However, this curve is aggregated typically in large timestamps. It should be noted that if consumers do not include storage system to mitigate dynamic changes on the grid during cloud cover, the generating company will have to ensure that they have the spinning reserve available to cover that loss in generation.
Absolutely, the person is correct. And I think I'm happy that someone recognizes that photovoltaic system and to some extent wind energy are variable power outputs. As a matter of fact, the contract for both the photovoltaic and the wind generating system is a power purchase agreement for energy, not for power.
Right.
And the utilities are the one who are left to hold up the power requirements. And in fact, for getting the renewable energy started off in any country, there is a cross-subsidization for the photovoltaics and the wind generators, so that the utility actually is cross-subsidizing the power requirement to get these renewable energy systems on board. However, that will change. And if you put batteries onto the system, one has to take into account the cost of that battery and the cost of the energy that you are now generating or you're utilizing. And you may find that when I aggregate those two costs and I amortize it over the life, let's say a 20-year period, you may find that the utility cost of electricity is still cheaper than this renewable energy. But what must be amortized in that to get this to operate is they have a chicken and egg situation, in that if I have too little bit of the renewable energy, then the cost per unit is high, and someone has to subsidize it. But if I don't get it involved, the cost will never go down. So that's why it comes back many a times that the government of the area is the one that cross-subsidizes it to get the system going. But however, one has to be cognizant of the fact that you have to take into account the total picture. Who is paying for the power? in the end, and really what's the true cost of the energy. So when I use net net metering, I have to make sure that what I'm cross subsidizing, and what really is important is the net billing. And when I look at the net billing, you'll realize in net billing, what is happening in net billing is that you pay different prices for energy I put onto the grid and for energy I take from the grid. When I put energy into the grid, the price they're going to pay is going to be less, because the utility has to put a cost on that to move that energy from your location to wherever it has to be used. When we use net metering, it's an aggregate of just the total energy, and it actually, the utility there is cross subsidizing the transmission of the power from one location to the other. But the participant is quite correct. Somebody is paying for this.
Right. Okay, so we have no further questions or comments. So thank you so much, Professor Sharmal, for that presentation. It was very, very informative.
Thank you.
Okay, so now leading us through the second half of this webinar is Dr. Bahadur Singh, who will take over now.
Thank you very much. So we're going to continue, and this section is a lot shorter in terms of content. I do believe that what Professor has done is provided a very good platform for us to continue the discussion on, and getting the fundamentals right is always important. So we're going to look a little bit on how the DSM has evolved, and you'll be surprised to know that load control was first identified in 1950s, and essentially it's a cap on the electrical usage at a given time, particularly in the residential class, which would lead to periodic disconnection and reconnection for the sole purpose of conserving electricity. This eventually upgraded to electronic load control in the 1960s, and then in the early 80s, a key strategy was the innovative rates. And when we look at the most common installations at that point in time, 1980, we would have had the water heaters, the air conditioners, pools, irrigation unit, and in other climates, you would have had heating facilities. But the innovative rates are designed to offer incentives to consumers to change their habits. And essentially, you want to make a shift in electricity consumption. And this is sufficient for you to invest in this type of technology, because ultimately you want to save money. The energy efficient investments is now a common place in each, well, I should say most utilities demand side management portfolio. One way or another, customers have been advised to utilize energy efficient lighting, whether you're utilizing reflectors, occupancy sensors, smart appliances, all that falls under the umbrella of energy efficient investments. And an EPRI study identified that you could potentially reduce your consumption by as much as 14%, which is quite a significant chunk. And of course, the demand response really is a big step in evolution. And in 2007, I recall reading that the US Energy Independence and Security Act, they coined this term. And what they were looking to do is reduce the peak demand by use of the dynamic pricing, the advanced metering, and associated technologies. And what you're looking at there is that demand response is actually one type of application of demand side management. Because I know that that question came up a little earlier. So another term you will hear is electrification. Now, electrification describes the conversion of the non-electric end users to electricity. So for instance, space and water heating applications, we don't do space heatings in the region, but instead of utilizing fuel, whether it be natural gas or any other type of fuel, you can now utilize electricity. And guess what? This is where the electric vehicle comes in, because now we are potentially looking at mass adoption of electric transportation instead of the internal combustion engine vehicles. So we can see right there that this electrification of our transportation can play an integral role in ensuring that we can achieve some measure of demand side management. So this stat here, which is quite useful to identify that the Reduction in gases such as CO2 by 114 to 320 million per year in terms of that would be quite a useful number. But what I'm concerned about here is that we need to recognize that while we can identify there needs to be a transition, and while there's potential, we need to go back to what we could do, not and what we would do. This is an example here of the slides, of the examples of electrification in this slide, sorry. So whether we look at it in terms of pumps, aircraft gate electrification, support equipment, um, as simple as lawn and garden equipment. Before, you would have been utilizing perhaps gasoline powered small engines to cut your hedges. Now you have those in, guess what, battery operated. They're driven by a motor. So we are seeing these transitions from everyday artifacts that would have been powered by an engine now to moving to battery operated and motor propelled. So there's an opportunity there for electrification, and this can easily provide itself at many levels. One, the low level, where we replace the small usage, and then on a large scale where you have the electric vehicles, well, you're going to end up with battery on wheels. And that is the beauty about this. We now have the opportunity to utilize the electric vehicle, and that market, which is, of course, we've read about projections of this. It is meant to give us a good opportunity to reduce our emissions, but most importantly, it can participate in the demand side management. The electric vehicle is both a consumer of energy as well as a battery storage option. So we end up with a very versatile piece of equipment that we can move around with. So there's a lot of potential there that everyone is aware of and is really identifying how we can harness this and include this into a utilities portfolio of demand side management. In some cases, they may have different options for charging, whether they're charging on a separate meter, would be a separate tariff. And in some cases, you may not have that, and then you end up with a potential for congestion on your network. How do you address the congestion on your network? Well, you want to have some measure of coordinated charging. This lends itself to, can utility now play a role in identifying, I am going to restrict this charging to X% on this particular feeder because it may be heavily loaded. I can restrict that even further if I know that I'm on the brink of a voltage collapse. But you can go the other way, and you can identify that with the electric vehicles, you can not only restrict your charging, but you can also ensure that you have a car park, which may be a source of batteries. If it is you now wanted to pull energy and power, this is an option that you have. So there are many pros and cons, and the electric vehicle is a very versatile electrification appliance when you think about it from a demand side perspective. And then, of course, I didn't mention the opportunities for the renewables, because now we have a good opportunity to increase renewables to provide the power to the batteries. And when you look at the opportunity for passenger vehicles as well as mass transportation options, it's amazing. There's at least electric 2 and 3 wheel vehicles could outnumber the 4-wheel vehicles by as many as 900 million estimated on the roads by 2030 from an IRENA study. And they identified that electric buses and light duty vehicles could well be about 10 million by 2030. In this particular example here, I really wanted to highlight that now hybrid vehicles reduce emissions substantially, while the battery electric vehicle eliminates the problem. So we now have an opportunity here where we can, of course, transition and meet our sustainability goals, but most importantly, the utility can have this as part of the demand side management, and a consumer has the versatile option of that electric vehicle. This is one example here from, this is California again, but it was the only place I can get this information which identified the electric vehicle participation in demand side management. What do we want to take away from this? Well, with demand side management, electric vehicle charging and storage, what you ended up with here, which is the purple dotted line, is a flatter profile. And ideally, that is more cost-effective option. So we end up in a position where we have improved what our low duration curve would look like from a flatline perspective. We have reduced the curvature, and that's what you want to achieve. So what about some of these solutions? So this slide that I captured from an IRENA document is I think is very powerful, and credit to them for having this in their document, because it does neatly identify the different arms associated with DSM solutions. And you've touched on them before. When we think about the smart home, once you have internet connectivity at home, you have your smart plugs, you have a lot of devices which are now connected to the internet and are all perhaps going to be either remotely monitoring or controlled by your smart device. It enables some measure of control, and that's good because you now set the platform for monitoring. You now set the ability to understand what it is this technology can bring into integrating the energy efficiency applications. You have the electric vehicle smart charging we discussed. We also have the opportunity to integrate the renewable energies. Now, having the renewable energy is good, but we also recognize that there's a wealth of data that we can get from scenarios where we have renewable energy, scenarios where we don't have renewable energy, that can help us actually come up with techniques that can predict and give us a better estimate of what our consumption patterns are going to look like. So just think about it for a second. We have the technologies at our disposal. We are trying to find a way to mesh everything. And then, of course, our business models. We have innovative models that create the business case for new services. And what this what this allows us is the energy as a service concept, and enhances the system's flexibility and incentivizes the further integration of the renewable energy technologies, because you are offering energy as a service. So just think about your customers and what they would want to get into. We're moving from a consumer into a prosumer, a basically production, a producer, and a consumer, a prosumer. And then, of course, in your market design, we have the time of use tariffs, the net billing scheme, something that we just talked about, and that will require some changes in the regulatory framework. So it's not just a straight case of implementing, it requires a bit of homework, but there's also opportunities to simulate how these business opportunities will impact. And that's something that lends itself to a bit more credibility, so that as you move towards rollout and education, you know what you can expect. And then, of course, on the final point, the system operation, well, we want to ideally move to cleaner grid. We want to ensure that we can harness as much as we can harness without compromising our system. And this is where the demand side opportunity can play its role, but it must be done so very cautiously to ensure that as we integrate higher penetrations of renewable energy, we are not compromising ourselves, but ensuring that step by step, all the technical checks and balances are made to ensure that the grid is stable. And that's something that we touched on a few weeks ago in that first presentation on grid modeling. I showed this slide last week, and I think it's very critical for us to come back to it, because by adjusting the load forecast model and including a demand side management practice, what you actually get are trajectories that identify what your model would look with and without the influence. And when we look at the green line, we have a future forecast without a future demand side. Sorry, the green line is with a future demand side, as opposed to the blue line, which identifies without a future demand side management. And again, there's only merit in identifying that, there's a lot of merit in identifying that this particular application lends itself to reducing your load, which is what you want to achieve at the end of the day. So in order to get your models right, this goes back to what we have been harping on all the time, you need the data. You need the data, you need the historical data before. You need you need to be capturing data as you move along each point, and you need to be periodically updating based on how these particular scenarios are changing. Because every time you implement a new demand side management technique, it's obviously going to make some shifts, and you need to be capturing and identifying, is this optimal? I've captured here some of the commercially available applications, very similar to what we discussed last week, because many times they go hand in hand. And what you find is the energy forecasting, which is your projection, will include some element of the demand side management. So they tend to integrate them holistically into these models. So do feel free to have a look when you get some chance. And now I want to move into discussing a little bit about the global and the regional context. And in this arena document, I found this was pretty useful. And the last point here that I've captured, a Google data center using AI experienced a 40% reduction in demand use in cooling. Now, the shift in the use of AI is very much applicable to the power sector. This is a data center. And we all know the importance of having a data center that is well cooled. Data can go down. We have grown very accustomed to ensuring that our reliability is very, very high. And utilizing the historical data collected from the sensors and applying a machine learning algorithm, they were able to predict the future temperature and the pressure of the data center, and therefore make adjustments in their cooling. So they saved at least 40% reduction in their demand, which was astonishing. Now, on the same page here, we have some other notes on the time of use in Sweden. They managed to achieve 17%. EPRI suggested no more than 14, they've achieved 17. So it's still in the same type of ballpark. And then this penultimate example here, where the utility demand reduced by 10% on average using a demand response. So again, we just discussed what a demand response would be in terms of identifying programs that we can allow customers to participate in, whether it be you want them to reduce their load for this period of time, they will be incentivized and their load will facilitate that. Great. You actually are allowing the opportunity to reduce your peak demand, but again, your energy is just being utilized at a different time. In this other example, again, software as a service. I found it quite interesting to recognize that a cloud-based intelligence software can monitor real-time load in large commercial and industrial facilities. And of course, what this represents is the ability to have that data that is uploaded and ensure that you have occupancy, the usage, the energy price points, and the software will automatically switch between loads where required. So for instance, if your AC systems and the battery storage based on time of use charges, so you can save money, and that was 40% on utility bill. So essentially what you have is like your software as a service, almost project managing your utilization of energy. And 40% is a significant savings, particularly at that type of customer, which is commercial and industrial. So if you convert that financially, the benefits are significant. So the demand side management must be introduced systematically and strategically. In order to save money, you have to hit the pocket. And therefore, the financial incentivization is a key motivator. You have to hit the pockets. If we are looking at promoting energy efficiency and financial incentivizing, you need to ensure that your population understands the need for the change. And therefore, education is critical to ensure that they appreciate that, so that their behaviors towards energy conservation, power generation's role in climate change is understood. They need to make that link to understand why my practice must change, why my bottom line will change, and what I can do to ensure that the financial impact is minimal relative to the other side of it, which is essentially maintaining our goals to ensure that our climate and our 1.5 to Stay Alive campaign that CARICOM aimed to alert the Caribbean people about was quite well done. It ensured that people understood that the region had 15 years to change energy habits and reduce their usage to prevent a 2-degree rise. Now, if you have to have a 2-degree rise in temperature, you're looking at a vast change in your climate: droughts, heat waves, storms, sea level rising. This is going to lead to further economic and environmental hardships. And of course, there's going to be social challenges associated with those repercussions. And we already have an appreciation of what's been happening because of this pandemic, and then with our brothers and sisters in St. Vincent. So let's think about the education and understanding that the education bit is critical. And we have identified that energy efficient investment remain the low-hanging fruit in the Caribbean region. And a lot of the minimum energy performance standards that have been developed and rolled out in some cases, this will help us to achieve what we want to, which is a permanent type of solution. So moving towards this will help us, and that's what we want to achieve. So if you combine the financial incentives, right, with the education, then what you're going to have is an optimal DSM scheme. It takes a lot of planning. So I want to encourage you all to look at the energy report cards that have been, I know CCREEE has done some of that, and there's also some at the other website I've put here, energy.gov, and they look particularly at the islands in the Pacific Islands and the Caribbean, and you can get very useful data that will identify existing policy, regulatory frameworks, the targets. It will help us identify what sort of energy efficiency mechanisms are in place. They will also tell you as much as the projects that are in pipeline, and those documents are 2019, 2020, so they're fairly updated and a very good starting point if it is you want to investigate who has been doing what and have an appreciation of what their trajectories are. And let's look at Barbados as an example. I like to showcase Barbados. I think that they're doing a fantastic job with pioneering these bold moves, and kudos to them. They have recognized that the trust for us to move forward is very much one that will incorporate renewable energy and electric vehicles, and they have been doing that. The rooftop PV, well, of course, with the renewable energy rider program, they have at least 30 megawatts of solar generation now, right? And they have been incentivizing customers to generate by the renewable energy sources. So that's a step in the right direction. When you look at the recent 33 electric buses that they have included in their fleet, the transport board, right? They have the highest EV capita per count. That puts them in a very strategic position to have the electric vehicle as a demand side appliance. So those pieces of the puzzle are becoming a lot clearer, and we can definitely find a way to integrate them. So getting that framework is one bit, and this is an example of what's been happening, within the region, so others can take note. The solar water heating program, everyone is quite aware of that, but most importantly, you're getting an opportunity to reduce your costs. I mean, I recall last week on a webinar when colleagues in Barbados said because of the ash, they were unable to have a cool shower. So that is the exception rather than the norm. But it gives us a good appreciation that we have an opportunity to lower carbon footprint, is very effective on space, and most of all, we can reduce the energy cost, which is what you want to do, reduce the need for domestic water heating systems. Again, very useful demand side management initiative. And then of course, they also have time of use tariff. And there was a question that came up earlier on time of use tariff. Yes, that information is available. So time of use tariff been applied in the region. I know that Jamaica has recently had a revised schedule published April 2021. I think I captured some of that here. But what we identified is islands within the region have been applying these tools and techniques. Okay, Jamaica has a very large portfolio in terms of the promotion of electrical energy efficient investments, and in 2018 that energy efficiency and energy conservation initiatives for 765 million is going to be something that is quite a feat. And you're looking at retrofitting the government offices, the facilities. You are looking to ensure that we have energy efficiency measures in that can be applied. These are low-hanging fruits, and all you really want to do here is ensure that you recognize it and you execute it, you would see the benefit of it, right? This would be the tariffs, and this is available on the JPSCO website. So you get a feel for, they have on peak, partial peak, off peak. Have a look at it. It's very, very informative. And then renewable energy, of course, they have been leading the way as well, providing a very good generation mix. And we have the opportunity to learn from each other. Everyone has been applying different measures based on their own circumstances in the local landscape, but regionally we have a lot of lessons that can be brought forward here. And in Trinidad and Tobago, they have had their 25% rebate on the regular electricity bill, which is less than 1,000 kilowatts bi-monthly. Tax credit for solar water heating. They've had the LED bulb program, allowing residential customers to come and collect their bulbs. You're allowed to swap out 4 bulbs, which is, again, a step in the right direction. The economics will dictate that these small initiatives are win-win opportunities. So you're creating the incentives. Of course, the pace at which you would like to execute them, well, that's a different challenge, and you're hoping that you can move in a very aggressive manner. In Guyana, there's been a series of lighting and solar PV projects. I saw one in the newspaper recently as well. Energy rating, labeling of appliances, they've been working aggressively on that. So everyone has been tapping into what we would have been doing collectively and identifying how it can work, bring it together. In St. Lucia as well too. They have the net metering and net billing is offered. So in addition to our tax credits, so what we're looking at again is that these things are happening across the region. The purpose of me highlighting this here is not to examine each particular CARICOM state, but identify that across the archipelago, we are actually employing some of these techniques. We are employing these technologies. We need to be ensuring that we identify how to make it work for us. And conscious of time, let me conclude and say that demand side management techniques and programs reduce the consumption on the customer side. And that's the goal. They are well documented programs. I've highlighted some within the region here. I've also highlighted from an application perspective how we could be moving towards integrating artificial intelligence techniques, which will help with the optimization, but you need data for that, right? We have identified that energy efficient investments remain the most effective and permanent technique that we can ensure some measure of stability moving forward as we want to get a hand in on the demand side management. And then of course, utilities should strive to financially incentivize our consumers, because that's the only way you're going to get this change. If it doesn't hit the pocket, it's not going to happen. So we have to find the way to ensure that they're financially incentivized. And then of course, education is paramount. If we don't understand why you need to do it, then there's a high likelihood that you're not going to be part of it. So understanding why we need to do it and understand how we're going to do it collectively is one of the most effective ways to ensuring that all are participating in the demand side management implementation. So I will stop there now, and thank you very much. And I guess we'll go to any questions, and I'll ask Professor Sharma just to stick around, and then do you have any questions for him as well?
Okay, thank you. There are questions. So
Sure.
it was said that education and implementation is the major challenge for adopting DSM. Isn't there also a significant investment required by consumers for more efficient equipment and or smart devices by the consumer? If consumers are cash strapped, would DSM fail or not be easily implemented for some population or sectors of populations?
So it's always going to be an issue of dollars and cents. But if they can understand and appreciate how this investment would lead to a return on that investment, then that's a step in the right direction. Because ultimately, everything is cost, and we're going to pay for it at one point or the other. We need to identify if this investment at this time is going to give me a return that justifies that. So the equilibrium, in terms of the market equilibrium, must be such that, yes, there's going to be a cost, but the costs at this point in time will lead to benefits later down the road on many different levels. So that's where the education bit marries into it. But yes, that's a valid comment.
Okay. Okay, the next question. With the introduction of IoT, smart house, wouldn't these devices increase demand as they would need energy to remain connected 24 hours a day?
So the IoT devices, we're looking at the power consumption on those are usually very low. And you're looking at you're in a sleep mode, you're in a because the mode at which they operate in draws very minimal energy relative to what they're actually controlling. So what you are looking at is a scale of perhaps milliwatts relative to watts and kilowatts. So from a long-term perspective, having that device running all the time, actually you save more.
Okay. Okay. What are some new strategies or recommendations that can be applied to help tackle non-technical losses from the grid, from the distribution grid?
You can take this one.
Well, the utility you can look at for getting some guidance in the Caribbean is Jamaica. And if you look at Jamaica, Jamaica had a non-technical loss, which was close to 20%. And when JPS came in, they implemented a system to curtail that loss. Now, one of the methods that they utilize is a method which has been used very successful in South Africa. And in South Africa, what they had, which is it's a system which has been used for normal usage of electricity in England a long time, is where you have coin meters, where you only put in a coin before you can get electricity. And what has happened with that is that they change all their overhead lines into covered lines, meaning the lines have look like cables, so that no one can just tap into it. And their metering system that they use, and they have to use a coin to pay for the electricity. So one of the keepbacks of in the Caribbean for non-technical losses is really government, because many of the times you find the areas which have the highest non-technical losses are government strongholds,
Right.
or in Jamaica, garrison towns. And the government has to be part of this if the utilities is wants to get this down. If the government does not want you to take any action on non-technical losses, then you end up with an issue right now. Trinidad does not have that problem, fortunately for us. Our technical losses are extremely low. Trinidadians, because electricity rates are low, that's the main reason for it. But in utilities where the electricity rates are high, then the non-technical losses go up. But in the Caribbean, there's a direct link between government and non-technical loss in terms of politics.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so AI was mentioned multiple times in this presentation and the last. AI seems nebulous. Can more examples of how AI can be used with examples or concepts be shared?
So that's something that we could do, something that we will have to do at another point in time, because we'll be going into the realm of the data collection, the data requirements, and the types of methodologies that you can apply based on the limitations of the data that you have. So yes, happy to have that discussion with whoever wants to, take a little more time to understand that. Happy to do so.
Okay. So DSM in the Caribbean, how critical do you suppose reliable data is to successful implementation versus tax incentives versus consumer buying?
Data is critical if you want to get this right.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have the data, all your projections are going to just be estimates. And this goes back to what we discussed the last time. You would not be near where you would need to have to be for an optimized system. So the data is critical. There's no doubt about it. The other measures will help. But if you want to be accurate and you want to ensure that from a utility perspective, you know exactly where your goals are and if you are achieving it, that data bit is the only way to inform.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so there are no more questions or comments. So we had a very informative and insightful introduction to demand-side management. Thank you very much, Professor Sharma and Dr. Bahadur Singh, for leading us so adeptly through the content. Extending much thanks to the CCREEE team who continues to ensure the quality of our capacity building session. To our participants, thank you for your active participation and contribution in today's session on demand-side management. Before you go, we invite your feedback on today's activities. We value your opinion and ask that you click on the link to the survey in the chat. Please continue to keep the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, St. Lucia and Barbados in your thoughts and do your part to help them recover from the recent volcanic events. Have a good and productive rest of the day.